North Korea all the way to his hometown of Busan, a city on South Korea's southeastern coast. Our top office correspondent Hwang Ho-jun starts us off.
When it comes to establishing peace and seeking mutual prosperity, South Korean President Moon Jae-in stressed how imperative Russia's role is in the region.
나는 한국과 러시아의 협력이 한반도 평화와 동북아 번영의 주춧돌이라고 생각하며 그동안 진심으로 노력해 왔습니다.
President Moon said the bilateral relationship between Seoul and Moscow is the key to open the gates of Eurasia, which the South Korean leader called a land of great opportunity.
유라시아가 가진 무궁무진한 가능성을 우리의 우정으로 활짝 열 수 있다고 믿습니다.
The comments were made as President Moon made history, delivering a speech at the State Duma, the lower house of Russia's Federal Assembly on Thursday, becoming the first South Korean president ever to do so. During the speech, President Moon noted his Russian counterpart's vision of an era of peace and co-prosperity among Eurasian nations, or the, quote, New East policy, is in sync with his own, quote, New Northern policy, the Moon administration's key diplomatic policy to expand South Korea's diplomatic and economic horizons with its Eurasian neighbors. According to President Moon, such efforts would see the two countries developing new growth engines, while Seoul keeps its promise to develop Russia's Far East. President Moon said the Korean people's desire for peace and prosperity is not limited to the Korean Peninsula, but involves all of Northeast Asia. And with that, President Moon introduced his vision for a trilateral partnership between Seoul, Pyongyang, and Moscow.
한반도의 평화 체제가 구축되면 남북 경제 협력이 본격화될 것이며 러시아와의 삼각 협력으로 확대될 것입니다.
President Moon identified railroads, natural gas, and electricity networks as the most promising sectors for cooperation among the three countries. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
And staying with President Moon's state visit to Russia, soon after addressing at the Russian Duma, the South Korean leader went to meet with Koreans living in the country, where he stated categorically that there will be no more war on the Korean Peninsula. Our Cha Sang-mi with the details.
Meeting with Russian officials, Russians of Korean descent, as well as Korean nationals living in Russia on Thursday, President Moon assured them there will be, quote, no more war on the Korean Peninsula.
한반도에 역사적인 평화의 기회가 열리고 있습니다. 이제 한반도의 전쟁은 다시 없을 것이고 남북 협력이 러시아와의 삼각 협력으로 확장될 것입니다.
President Moon said he will be sitting down with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Friday to discuss ways the two nations can cooperate for peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and in Eurasia. He expressed gratitude to the Russian people who helped Korean independence activists on their soil during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the early to mid-20th century. Noting that Seoul and Moscow will be celebrating 30 years of diplomatic relations in 2020, Moon said the advancement in their bilateral relations during such a short time frame was impressive.
최근에는 극동 지역과 유라시아 개발 협력을 통해 속도를 더하고 있습니다. 지난해 양국 간 교역량은 190억 달러, 전해와 비교해서 무려 40% 증가했습니다.
He stressed that the priority for Seoul-Moscow cooperation should be on the health and welfare of the two countries' citizens. Sharing his excitement for the Russia World Cup, he commented on sports and arts, ranging from Tolstoy's Anna Karenina musical shown in Korea and the K-pop and K-drama fever in Russia, saying they will surely bring South Korea and Russia even closer. The head of Moscow Korean Association welcomed President Moon, expressing hope the reconciliatory mood between the Koreas will lead to three-way cooperation with Russia. As for the next generation of Russians of Korean descent and Korean nationals living in the nation, President Moon vowed to provide support and expand scholarship programs so they can cherish Korean language and culture. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Delegations from the two Koreas are meeting once again today for their Red Cross talks. Now, top of the agenda is arranging reunions of the separated families, but other humanitarian issues could also be discussed as well. We go live to our Unification Ministry correspondent Oh Jung-hee, who has been following the story at Seoul's Office for Inter-Korean Dialogue. Jung-hee, we've learned that the South Korean delegation has passed the military demarcation line a while ago. What's the latest on that front?
Good morning, Semin. As you've just said, the South Korean delegation crossed the inter-Korean land border roughly an hour and a half ago. They left Seoul yesterday afternoon and spent the night in the northeastern county of Gosong in Gangwon-do province. Now, as we speak, we're expecting the Red Cross talks have begun between the two Koreas. The talks were scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. at North Korea's Mount Kumgang. Today's talks are to discuss humanitarian issues, including the reunions of families separated by the Korean War. South Korea is sending a 4-member delegation led by the president of the South Korean Red Cross, Park Kyung-seo. North Korea sent the list of its delegates 8 hours ago. The delegation has 3 members and is led by Park Yong-il, the vice chairman of the North's Reunification Committee. Take a look at what the South Korean delegation had to say upon their departure on Thursday.
I hope to have good discussions with the North on humanitarian issues, especially resolving the sorrow of over 57,000 separated family members in South Korea.
So, Chung-hee, taking away from that comment, we can say the setting up these family reunions is going to be the main agenda for today's talks.
You're right. The main agenda on the table is setting the schedules for the family reunions that, as the leaders of Seoul and Pyongyang have agreed at their summit talks in April to hold the reunions of the families separated by the Korean War on August 15th. That's the National Liberation Day. If the reunion event is to take place, this will be the first time in 3 years since the last event in October 2015. Over 132,000 people are registered as separated from their family members, but among them, only 56,000 are still alive, and among those, 85% are over 70 years old. South Korea is likely to suggest that the North allow separated family members to exchange letters and visit their hometowns, but it's unclear whether Pyongyang will accept the proposal. We also can't rule out the possibility of delegations discussing some other humanitarian issues, including the release of South Korean detainees in the North, as well as Seoul providing humanitarian assistance to Pyongyang through the World Food Program and UNICEF. Semin.
Thank you. Our Oh Jung-hee live for us at Seoul's Office for the Inter-Korean Dialogue. Now, staying with that story, as we just heard from our Oh Jung-hee, one of the most anticipated topics of today's Inter-Korean Red Cross talks is the reunion of separated families. If all things go well, families from the two Koreas will be given a chance to see each other again on August 15th, as agreed in the Panmunjom Declaration. Our Kim Mo-kyun tells us more.
The history of separated families on the Korean Peninsula stretches back to the Korean War in the 1950s. Millions of people were separated from their loved ones, with many not even having a chance to say a proper goodbye. But with the efforts of the Red Cross from both sides, the first historic reunion was realized in 1985 when Seoul and Pyongyang held performances on the sidelines of the 40th Independence Day celebration, allowing some 30 citizens from each country to meet their war-torn families. And 15 years later, in 2000, state-run reunion events and exchanges between families officially kicked off after the two Koreas agreed to cooperate on humanitarian issues at the June 15 Inter-Korean Summit. The first historic reunion was held on August 15 that year and was followed by another 19 face-to-face reunion events over the next 15 years, allowing nearly 20,000 members of some 4,100 families to see each other again. Aside from face-to-face meetings, other types of exchanges such as 7 video reunions and 600 letter exchanges have also been made. However, since 2015, such reunion activities have stalled, and South Korea has been calling for an urgent revival of the reunion events since last year, as there may not be much time left for some of these families. As of the end of May, almost 57% of the estimated 130,000 family members on the waiting list for reunions have died, with more than 85% of the remaining survivors aged above 70 years old. The North, meanwhile, had been demanding the repatriation of 12 female North Koreans who worked at a restaurant in China and came to the South in 2016 as a condition for the resumption of the event. But with the thawing of relations between the two sides lately, and with President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un agreeing on the Panmunjom Declaration, there are high expectations that the family reunions will resume this year. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump says North Korea has already started its full-scale denuclearization, mentioning that the remains of American soldiers who died during the Korean War are being returned to the United States. He emphasized that Pyongyang is sticking to the agreement sealed at the recent North Korea-U.S. summit in Singapore. Our Kan Hyung-woo with the more.
During a cabinet meeting on Thursday, President Trump said North Korea has already entered the process of denuclearization, specifically citing that Pyongyang is destroying its missile test sites.
They're destroying their engine site. They're blowing it up. They've already blown up one of their big test sites. In fact, it was actually 4 of their big test sites. And the big thing is it will be a total denuclearization, which is already taking place.
However, he did not clarify that these blown-up facilities include the Punggye-ri nuclear test site that North Korea already destroyed back in May. Having said the remains of 200 fallen U.S. soldiers had been sent back from North Korea the day before, Trump made it clear the process is ongoing.
That they've already sent back or in the process of sending back the remains of our great heroes who died in North Korea during the war. And that's already in the process of coming back.
He added that the relationship with North Korea is quote-unquote very good and that he and Kim Jong-un are going to create a brighter future for North Korea. According to State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert on Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will meet with North Korean officials at the earliest date possible to implement the outcomes of North Korea-U.S. summit. But she said there were no meetings or travel plans to be announced at the current time. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
And Japan's efforts to get on North Korea's good side isn't likely to be working well. North Korea's official newspaper, the Rodong Shinmun, brought up Japan's responsibility for its wrongdoings during its colonial rule. The paper says Friday that relations between North Korea and Japan remain sour because of Tokyo's reluctance to settle its past wrongdoings. It also added that Japan cannot hide or be free from its past and said it should acknowledge its wrongdoings and provide compensation. The North Korean report comes just a day after the Japanese government announced that it is halting all evacuation drills following the regime's diplomatic developments in the region. Japan is the only one of North Korea's neighbors yet to hold talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And with North Korea opening up to the international community step by step, hope is rising that North Korean athletes will be taking part in the next 2 Olympics in Tokyo and Beijing. IOC chief Thomas Bach said on Thursday that he fully supports North Korea's participation in the upcoming Olympic Games, adding that he hopes to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to discuss North Korea's participation in the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. Now, this comes as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un told him in March during their meeting in Pyongyang that he wants North Korean athletes to compete in Tokyo and the 2022 Winter Games in Beijing. In other news, another exciting day of football action at the World Cup in Russia. Croatia grabbed all the headlines with their stunning victory over Argentina in Group D. And in Group C, France cruised through the knockout phase of the tournament, sweeping aside Peru, who will be on the plane home after their final group match. Our Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
Day 8 of the 2018 Russia World Cup began at the Samara Arena, where Denmark squared off against Australia in Group C. Early in the game, Christian Eriksen's shot from the center of the box found the back of the net, giving Denmark a 1-0 lead. It stayed that way until the 38th minute, when the video assistant referee awarded Australia a penalty. Miles Jedinak smashed the penalty home to make it 1-1, and that's how it ended. The result means Denmark need to avoid defeat in their final Group C match against France to be certain of reaching the last 16. Australia can still qualify, but must beat Peru to have any hope. The next game saw France, one of the favorites at this year's World Cup, take on Peru at the Central Stadium in Yekaterinburg. Peru, looking to pull off an upset, started at a fierce pace, but failed to capitalize on several early chances. Instead, it was Kylian Mbappe who became France's youngest ever World Cup goal scorer at the age of 19, with a close-range strike in the 33rd minute to give France the 1-0 victory. The win means France are through to the knockout phase. With 2 losses out of 2, Peru have no hope of extending their stay in Russia. The day's last game saw Argentina take on Croatia in Nizhny Novgorod. Argentina were looking to bounce back from their draw against Iceland in Group D against an underrated Croatian side. A scoreless first half, but a 53rd minute goal by Ante Rebic broke the deadlock after a terrible mistake by the goalkeeper. The Argentine defense proceeded to collapse as Luka Modric and Ivan Rakitic scored late in the match to give Croatia a stunning 3-0 victory. With the win, Croatia advances to the knockout stages. Argentina, on the other hand, are facing the prospect of an early World Cup exit. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The Trump administration is taking its first steps to begin reuniting more than 2,000 undocumented migrant children and parents separated at the U.S.-Mexico border. For more on this and other news around the world, we turn to our Do Aram at the News Center. So, Aram, what's the latest?
Well, Simon, President Trump said Thursday that he had directed the Departments of Justice, Homeland Security and Health and Human Services to work on bringing together the separated families. It's a first step to implementing his policy-reversing executive order, which he signed on Wednesday, and that states that migrant families entering the U.S. should be detained together. The order still faces possible legal challenges, and administration lawyers have filed a request to modify a previous court settlement that limits the government's detention of minors to 20 days. However, Trump still insisted tougher immigration laws were needed and blamed the Democrats for creating what he called loopholes in the current system.
But the only real solution is for Congress to close the catch and release loopholes that have fueled the child smuggling industry. The Democrats are causing tremendous damage and destruction and lives by not doing something about this. And they know that. They know that better than anybody up there with a pen. If we don't close these loopholes, there is no amount of money or personnel in the world to address the crisis. A very serious crisis.
His comments came as his wife, Melania, made a surprise visit to a border detention center in Texas.
I'm here to learn about your facility, and which I know you house children on a long-term basis. And I also like to ask you how I can help to these children to reunite with their families as quickly as possible.
However, her trip was immediately thrown into controversy after she was seen wearing a jacket with the words, quote, "I don't really care, do you?" U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says Washington needs to create a, quote, "painful environment for trading partners with high trade barriers." He made the comments during a CNBC interview on Thursday, adding such measures were required to achieve President Trump's ultimate goal of lower barriers and a level playing field. He also singled out China, saying it's, quote, "compounded by their disrespect of intellectual property, the forced technology transfers, the cyber security breaches." China's Commerce Ministry hit back, accusing the U.S. of being protectionist and blackmailing by threatening to impose further tariffs on Chinese goods. It also said trade talks between both countries were being put at risk due to Washington's unpredictable and hostile manner. The ministry was responding to Trump's threat earlier this week to impose $200 billion of Chinese imports with 10% tariffs if Beijing retaliates to his previous duties announcement. Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is reported to have produced enough lava over the past 50 days to fill 100,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. USA Today reported Thursday the figure amounts to 250 million cubic meters of lava, making last month's eruption one of the largest Hawaii has seen in decades. Since May 3rd, Kilauea has continuously erupted, destroying nearly 600 homes and forcing over 2,000 people to evacuate.
Good morning. Today will be another very hot day across much of South Korea, but Beijing will get some brief relief from the heat this Friday. Now, the heat got stronger across Korea. In fact, a heat wave advisory is in effect in Daegu and parts of Gyeongsang-do, Gangwon-do provinces, with highs hovering around 33 degrees Celsius this afternoon. But it's not only the heat we need to worry about. Strong UV rays are in the forecast, along with unhealthy ozone levels in the afternoon. So please try to reduce the amount of time you spend outdoors and make sure to drink plenty of water today. And taking a closer look at Friday's daily highs, Seoul and Daejeon will see highs rising a couple of degrees higher than yesterday, hitting at 31 degrees. Chuncheon, Daegu, Gyeongju will get up to 33 degrees this afternoon. And there's more hot weather at the start of next week, hitting a peak on Monday at 33 degrees Celsius here in the capital, before the monsoon rain on Tuesday brings some relief from the heat wave. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
That wraps it up for us at the hour, but keep it tuned to Arirang News for more news updates coming up at noon Korea time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.
刘以豪，今年31岁，我来自台湾，我的职业是演员。我私底下的样子，跟我的狗玩， 沙发上发呆、赖床。大家可能不知道，还有另一个我。跟着我一起来认识这充满活力的台北，一起走吧。挑一套适合自己的衣服，穿出个人风格，自信就是时尚。来逛街吧。饿了吗？这里有很多好吃的，这是最近最热门的地方，用美食为自己充电。还有一样让我感到非常幸福的，那就是音乐。听音乐的时候，是我最放松、开心、自在的时刻。最后，让我感到幸福的，就是一直陪伴在我身边、为我加油的粉丝们。因为有他们热情的支持，我才能获得力量，和粉丝们一起共度充满欢乐的时光。我的能量泉源来自这里。Arirang。
Welcome back to another edition of Foreign Correspondents. I'm Tommy Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Now, the biggest issue this past week was, without question, the historic North Korea-US summit. So how did you guys cover the meeting?
I cover it from Seoul because my radio sent a lot of journalists in Singapore. So, of course, you needed people in Seoul to show the South Korean perspective on it. And I think it's very important because from what I could read, people in Singapore had a very American perspective. And I think it's important to explain how people here see.
Absolutely agree.
One of my radios, they even sent from Paris a reporter to Seoul to cover. So we were two people covering from Seoul the summit. And I think that's interesting. It shows that people understand that it's very important to explain the South Korean perspective in the summit.
Get the perspective from the ground.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so this week on Foreign Correspondents, we'll dissect the June 12th Kim-Trump meeting, what was agreed upon, what wasn't, and where we go from here. The summit of the century, as it has been called, was finally held on June 12th.
I think tremendous success. They'll be tremendously successful. And it's my honor, and we will have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt.
여기까지 오는 길이 그리 쉬운 길은 아니에요. 우리한테는 우리 발목을 잡는 그 과거가 있고 또 그릇된 국민과 발행들이 우리 때로는 우리 눈과 귀를 가리고 있었는데 우리 모든 것을 이겨내고 이 자리까지 왔습니다.
The two leaders held a 35-minute discussion in private under a highly cordial atmosphere. This was then followed by an expanded summit which took place for around 1 hour and 40 minutes in the presence of their aides. Following a luncheon meeting and a brief walk, the two leaders put their signatures on a joint declaration at around 1:40 p.m. local time.
역사적인 이 만남에서 지난 과거를 덮고 새로운 출발을 알리는 그 역사적인 문건에 서명을 하게 됩니다. 세상은 아마 중대한 변화를 보게 될 것입니다.
Starting that process very quickly, very, very quickly. Absolutely. You'll be seeing everything in just a little while. The letter that we're signing is very comprehensive, and I think both sides are going to be very impressed with the result.
In this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to take an in-depth look at the historic North Korea-US summit and its ramifications. So how would you assess the summit on a grade of A to F? For example, taking into account things like the agenda, outcome, security, atmosphere, and everything?
I would mark it somewhere around a B-. Okay. I don't think anyone was expecting a breakthrough to come out of this, and I think even the days leading up to the summit, everyone from the White House to Chunghwa Day here in South Korea was downplaying, kind of walking back some of the big proclamations that people were hoping to hear. But I think at the end of the day, it's good to have North Korea sitting down at the negotiating table and not pushing it back into a corner. And for that, I think that was the best outcome of the summit.
Okay.
I would give a B+. I think, of course, there is a lot of shortcomings, and we probably discuss about it. There is no schedule on denuclearization. The document is very vague, but it's an extremely important step. And in terms of optics, to see the two leaders meeting, shaking hands. It's very important to change the relationship between the US and North Korea. And that was a very good start. And for me, that's really the main thing I want to remember from this summit. So that's why I would give B+.
Okay, we have B-, B+.
I would be in the middle. Probably. Yeah, I take a B. But it's interesting that most North Korea experts from academia or from think tanks, especially from the US, they would probably rate it like almost an F. I mean, they were really, because in terms of results, yeah, you can say there was not much outcome. But I mean, we also have to consider where we came from. I mean, last year, both leaders, they were threatening with war, and Kim Jong-un was testing all the missiles. So I think it's a good step, and I'm rather upbeat about it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so a B overall. Now, Kim and Trump, they come from vastly different backgrounds, and there is an almost 40-year age gap between the two. But did you think they enjoyed good rapport nonetheless?
Well, it's hard to judge. I mean, we weren't, seeing what was behind closed doors. I mean, they both actually have some similarities. They came from the privileged class in their respective homes.
There is something else, another similarity, that both of them are not the first son in their dynasty.
Yes.
Both Trump and Kim Jong-un had to somehow overcome their older brother. But anyway, something that strikes me is that, like Donald Trump, when he gives handshakes, he really has this power handshake. I remember this handshake with the French President Emmanuel Macron, where they were really like fighting, and he didn't do that with Kim Jong-un. You could see he was trying to play nice. He was.
But there was the battle of who can pat who on the back as they were walking out. Who was the last one to get that hand on the shoulder? So
does it mean a lot to put your back to your hand on the
I mean,
shoulder?
I think it's a showing, like, it's still I think a mark of dominance. Like,
I
come with me, boy. Like, this is
Not as much as a pat on the shoulder, but a pat on the back, I think, is along the lines of showing dominance.
Both of them did that, right?
Yes, they did. Yeah. They took turns.
But that's important, right? Because it was vice versa. And I mean, Kim Jong-un seemed a little bit nervous in the beginning, and I think it also has to do with the age gap, and he's meeting the most powerful president in the world. But Donald Trump, he also seemed rather like careful, and like and you could see the moment once they clicked and became rather relaxed. And those emotions, I think they are hard to fake. You can only play or put on a mask to some degree. And my impression, I'm not a psychologist, but my impression, they got really along quite well. And Trump, I mean, you can say about what you want, but he seems authentic. He goes for his intuition and for his guts.
When do you think that click occurred during the summit?
The first moment when I realized this cannot go wrong was actually already after the first patting of the shoulder, and you could see that they were loosening up a little bit.
Well, Donald Trump said he could read Kim Jong-un within the first few seconds of meeting him, so I think we can assume the click happened then.
Okay. Was there any one moment apart from the pats on the back that stood out for you during the summit?
I think seeing the flags, kind of the American flag placed next to the North Korean flag, that's probably never happened before. It's a memorable moment.
I agree with you. And what is more amazing with these flags, alternative flags, that North Korean people, we see that. Ordinary North Korean people, we see. It's a very, very striking and powerful symbol. So that's what I remember too.
Right, alternating and at the same height.
Yes, exactly.
So quite significant. Now, both Kim and Trump traveled to Singapore 2 days in advance, 2 days before the actual summit on June 12th. Is there any meaning behind this? Why might have they arrived early?
For Kim, for example, we know that he did some sightseeing in Singapore. He went to see the skyline, to the observation deck of the skyscrapers. He went to the port in Singapore. And I found this quite meaningful because even that was reported the next day. Also in the Rodong Shinmun, there was a front page where you can see the glittering skyline of Singapore. And Kim mentioned we can learn from Singapore, from the economy, even from the societal changes. So, I mean, that was amazing, this openness, I think.
Okay. A colleague of ours one time wrote an article called Singapore is a North Korea with palm trees. I mean, essentially, it's been a dictatorship light, so perhaps Kim Jong-un could feel a little bit more at home with some of the, the more draconian laws that are in place in Singapore.
It's definitely a good developmental model from North Korea. Yes. I mean, I don't think you can really compare North Korea with Singapore.
No, light years difference, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can still retain some kind of authority and control on your government and open the economy. So yeah, of course, it makes sense for North Korea.
All right, since coming into power, this is the longest time that Kim Jong-un has traveled abroad, set foot in a foreign country, and it was a closely watched affair as opposed to a closely guarded one. Do you think this indicates that there is a significant change from the past on Kim Jong-un's behalf?
I saw it as a change, but also, for example, when we go back, Kim Jong-il, he visited, for example, in Shanghai, the Pudong International Zone, and he was also like looking at the skyscrapers there, and also said like, oh, we could consider following the Chinese model too. And of course, we know that didn't happen yet, but it's not the first time that the North Korean leader will go to another Asian country and look at the economic development, for example.
But I don't think it's a radical change, but I do think we see a change. Like these images of Singapore by night, these very impressive images that appear in the Rodong Shinmun, the North Korean official newspaper, the day after. I mean, I have a personal anecdote. When 10 years ago, I used to work for an NGO in North Korea, and I took 5 North Korean people in China for a trip. They spent a week to be prepared to what they would see in North Korea. Because in North Korea, you know that the outside is more developed, but to see it is different. So they somehow brainwashed them before. And once I took these 5 North Koreans, we arrived at the Beijing airport. They were completely, they couldn't even speak how there is electricity, light, skyscraper. So to show this image of Singapore by night to everybody in North Korea, I think without preparing anybody, I really see that there is something is changing in North Korea. That was very impressive.
On that note, how do you think the average North Korean citizen is viewing all of this?
Well, I mean, I would imagine they have mixed feelings. They've been educated their entire lives to believe that the U.S. imperialists are just waiting for the moment to topple the regime and enslave the North Korean people. I mean, think whatever, worst case scenarios are. So this has to be kind of a little mind-blowing to them to see images of their marshal shaking hands with the enemy leader.
We do know that, for example, when Mike Pompeo visited Pyongyang, the images were shown on the Rodong Shinmun, and a lot of people from the sources I know that came back from North Korea, Western sources, they tell me that people were fascinated by what they were seeing. That created among North Korean, ordinary North Korean people, some hope that change is coming. I mean, North Korean people now, they seem to know what's happening. And
the regime can't hide anymore. I mean, for decades, they tried to make their citizens believe that they were living in this socialist paradise. But now with foreign media being smuggled into North Korea on USB sticks, DVDs in the past, like the regime can't hide anymore that North Korea is much worse off than almost every other country.
Now, looking back, in hindsight, do you think Singapore was the perfect place to host the summit, or would another location have been better?
I mean, I think there was some hope for the journalists based here in Seoul that it would happen, at the very least in Panmunjom again. But I think that was technically difficult and with security concerns. But also, I mean, Donald Trump was not going to go to the North Korean side of the border. Another option was Mongolia, but that probably does not have, I mean, I've been to Ulaanbaatar. I don't think it has the same kind of amenities and facilities that Singapore would. Singapore is not it's an economically strong country, but it's not a politically strong country. So I think this was a good way for, Singapore's own global branding as a neutral country that can bring enemies together. So, I mean, given the lack of other options, probably Singapore was the best.
It seems that Pyongyang and Washington-Singapore summit has overall been well received by analysts. But in contrast, opinions differ on the content of the joint statement. So let's take a look. The fact that the two leaders of North Korea and the US were meeting at all created a buzz across the globe ahead of the two countries' bilateral summit. Many eyes were focused on the joint declaration that was signed by the two leaders. The document contained a 4-point statement, including the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, ensuring a framework of peace, and the normalization of ties between North Korea and the United States.
We both want to do something, we both are going to do something, and we have developed a very special bond. So this is going to lead to more and more and more.
However, the joint declaration from the summit has received mixed reviews from observers. Most foreign media outlets were thrilled by the meeting between the two leaders, calling it a historic summit. However, criticisms were also abound, with the UK's Guardian pointing out that the declaration did not go much further than the existing denuclearization agreement. The Washington Post, meanwhile, expressed concerns that President Trump was giving legitimacy to the leader of one of the world's most brutal totalitarian regimes. At around 5 p.m. local time Singapore, President Trump held a press conference where he said further details on the agreement will be discussed in the future. He also delivered a message of gratitude to the South Korean President Jae-in.
I just want to tell him about the meeting, very successful, and he'll be very much involved in the final negotiation. He's a very, very fine gentleman, also a friend of mine, and I look forward to speaking to him. He'll be very happy when he hears about. I've already sent word to him about what happened. I sent the document to him, actually, and all of the details behind the document. So I'll be talking to him very shortly.
Meanwhile, the presidential Blue House welcomed the North Korea-US joint declaration immediately following President Trump's press conference.
우리 정부는 이번 합의가 온전히 이행되도록 미국과 북한 그리고 국제사회와 아낌없이 협력할 것입니다. 한반도에 항구적인 평화가 정착되고 공존과 번영의 새 시대가 열릴 수 있도록 대한민국의 대통령으로서 혼신의 노력을 다할 것을 약속드립니다.
The Kim-Trump summit will be remembered as a historic moment and an important first step towards solving the issue of Pyongyang's nuclear program and ending the long-standing animosity between North Korea and the United States. Okay, so let's talk about the joint declaration. There were 4 main points in there. New era of ties, peace on the Korean Peninsula, reaffirm Panmunjom Declaration, and recover prisoners of war and those missing in action. So how do these contents compare with your expectations going into the summit?
I mean, it's clearly, for me, a disappointment. I think the summit was very important, but the declaration in itself, everybody was expecting, in terms of denuclearization, something more substantive. And really it wasn't. In terms of denuclearization, it just repeats the same words as the Panmunjom Declaration. There is nothing related to irreversible, verifiable, complete denuclearization. So that's really a disappointment, I have to say.
And if you just look at the semantics of these 4 points, it's all we commit to working toward, we commit, to establishing. It's not, we will establish. It's like, well, yeah, it's a good idea, so we'll talk about it later on. I mean, everything, the can is completely kicked down the road for everything. So again, I was not expecting a breakthrough, but it was such a watered down statement, it was disappointing.
Right, and that denuclearization issue, we expect that to be perhaps number 1 on the declaration, not number 3, right? And if you actually do a side-by-side comparison of what North Korea put out in their state media, of what they were looking to achieve going into the summit, it was exactly the same, in the same order.
Yeah, right. And they published in their in the KCNA, for example, that they want a step-by-step denuclearization and a step-by-step process. And they wrote that Trump would have, realized that this is the way to go. And then on the other hand, Pompeo was in Seoul and saying, no, we want a CVIT, we want a complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, and our goal has not changed. So I'm not sure how they, if they really got the details right, and or if everyone takes only the aspects of the results that they wanted.
And something that disappoints me as well is that, we just heard Donald Trump. I don't understand why you can change the relationship with North Korea, but why try so hard to defend Kim Jong-un, to call him a talented man, to say, oh, he loves his people. That really I don't understand. I think that was not necessary. We have to talk with him because he's a dictator who killed his own half-brother. He puts thousands of people, of his own people, in concentration camps. And I don't think we should deny that. That doesn't mean we should talk to him, but I don't understand why he keeps telling that Kim Jong-un is such a great guy.
Even more scary that, I mean, just several days before he was in Canada at the G7 meeting, he basically, how he treated his traditional allies was really, and he seems to get along quite well with Putin, with Kim. And I think there's a, I think he likes the antagonists, the quote-unquote bad boys. I think that's rather appealing for him.
Right. Another layer to his unorthodox ways. Now, both sides, they had numerous high-level discussions going into the summit, and even in the late hours, the night before the summit, there were high-level meetings there. So what do you think were perhaps the biggest points of contention?
Mostly, I think denuclearization is probably the point. And obviously, the fact that they didn't reach any agreement. The South Koreans somehow hoped that the Americans would do more on the denuclearization front. And Donald Trump keeps presenting himself as the best negotiator in the world, but so far on that front, no. Obviously,
he cancelled a deal that was much more comprehensive, actually, the one with Iran, and presented this as a very historic step. I mean, it's But do you think that the working level talks with North Korea, between North Korea and the US, they will go on and they will work on the details, or do you think it will take a lot of time?
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said as early as next week there will be some follow-up discussions. Well, I mean, we'll see if those actually take place.
I think that's the only way to do it anyway. Nobody believes that North Korea will suddenly give up their nuclear weapon. I think it's a very long process that will take years. And
look, I mean, whether it be 2 years from now or was it 6 years from now, there will be a different U.S. president, but Kim Jong-un will most likely still be in power. So they know the longer they can draw out this process of denuclearizing, they can renegotiate terms with the next U.S. president.
But as long as, I mean, Trump said that the sanctions will continue. So as long as the sanctions are here, I don't see any problem with having a long process, a phased process. Why not?
Now, you mentioned this before, you touched upon this, but Trump prides in his ability to negotiate, the art of the deal, as he likes to call it. So in this summit, who do you think walked away with the better deal?
Kim Jong-un.
I think it's Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. And what do you think each side has gained, if anything, for the US?
To be honest, I don't like this view of having to view summits as like a battle and who's the winner and who's the loser. But I mean, only if you look at the paper and the outcome, I think Kim Jong-un has reached a lot, because the biggest concessions clearly came from the US side, and ironically they were made during the press conference afterwards. For example, stopping the quote-unquote war games, and not even like South Korea was probably surprised as well, because the next day it was a spokesperson from the presidential house said, we don't even know what Trump meant, we have to figure that out first. So Trump didn't prove to be a very good negotiator, I guess.
Okay.
I agree with you. And in terms of image, I mean, Kim Jong-un is clearly the winner. We saw people in Singapore were taking pictures of him and were cheering him. And you can see how his image completely changed in the last 6 months. But I agree with you, it's not a zero-sum game. It's good for everybody that the two leaders are finally talking, and Trump can spin that as a win for him. And actually, this is what he's trying to do. And maybe we should ask this question to Jason, but how in the US, I'm not talking about pundits and commentators, but normal people, how do they see, do they think Trump it's a win for Trump?
It probably, America right now, I think, is so divided. You either love Donald Trump and everything he does, or you hate him and hate everything he does. But I think that we should also say that China came out with some victories out of this, especially in regard to the war games, as Fabian mentioned, the joint military exercises conducted between U.S. and South Korean forces. China has been pushing for a very long time for the U.S. and South Korea to call off these drills. And it looks like they got what they wanted.
Yeah, China used to call it a freeze-for-freeze solution.
Yes. Right.
And I think there was a first surprise that suddenly Trump agreed to that position and adopt this solution. That was very surprising.
Okay, so the last question is this. Do you think this summit has actually paved the way for better relation 2.0, if you would like to say, for the Korean Peninsula, the way that President Moon Jae-in envisioned?
I mean, I kind of heard the same talk in the early 2000s when Kim Dae-jung met Kim Jong-il, and again when Roh Moo-hyun met Kim Jong-il, and Look, I mean, this has certainly gone further. You know, North Korea has taken many more steps than it has ever taken before to engage. But let's see, there's nothing really concrete yet has happened.
Okay.
First, we have to remember last year we were afraid of a war. We were talking of war, so the situation really improved. And the situation in North Korea changed. The North Korea today is not the same as the North Korea from Kim Dae-jung or Roh Moo-hyun era. The army first policy is not, disappeared in North Korea. So I want to see. I think the summit was a very good first step, but it's just that. It's just a first step. And we'll see where it goes. But at least it's a first step in the right direction.
Yes.
Yeah, that's probably a good viewpoint. And at least it didn't disturb the inter-Korean peace process too. So I think I wouldn't call it a milestone, but it doesn't affect negatively the inter-Korean peace process. And I mean, there were also local elections here in South Korea, and it was like a phenomenal win of the ruling party.
Yes.
And I would interpret this result as a vote of confidence for Moon Jae-in's North Korea policy, because that was the dominating issue actually during that time. So yeah, I think the process will go on, and probably the concrete results will come soon.
Okay. All right. Do you have any final comments to add?
Even though I might